Among all the miracles recorded in the four Gospels, only one moved the ruling council in Jerusalem to formally resolve that Jesus must die. It did not follow a Sabbath healing or a confrontation in the temple courts. It followed the moment a dead man walked out of his own tomb in a village 2 miles from the city. And the account of how he got there begins with a message that Jesus received and then, for 2 full days, appeared to ignore. The man's name was Lazarus, the Greek form of the Hebrew Eleazar, meaning God has helped. He lived in Bethany with his sisters Martha and Mary, and John tells us the village sat about 15 furlongs from Jerusalem, roughly 2 miles along the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. Their home was familiar ground to Jesus. Luke records an earlier visit in which Martha busied herself with serving, while Mary sat listening at his feet. And the household appears throughout the Gospels as a place where Jesus was received as a friend rather than a public figure. When sickness entered that house, the sisters turned instinctively toward him. Jesus was staying beyond the Jordan at the time, in the region where John had first baptized, and the sisters sent a messenger across that distance with a report rather than a request. The wording they chose is a study in restraint. John chapter 11 records it. "Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick." They attached no plea and offered no argument. They simply laid their brother's condition before Jesus and trusted that his love for Lazarus would carry the weight of everything they left unsaid. When Jesus heard it, he answered, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby." Those words would have been difficult to reconcile with what followed, because Lazarus did die. The sickness ran its course, the breath left his body, and the house in Bethany filled with mourning. Before the narrative moves another step, John pauses to record something the reader will need in order to understand what comes next. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. The evangelist places that statement directly against the sentence that seems to contradict it. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. The delay was deliberate, and John wants us to know it was the delay of a friend who loved this family, not the neglect of a teacher too occupied to come. The geography helps explain the timeline. The journey from the far side of the Jordan to Bethany took roughly a day on foot, which means the messenger had traveled a day to reach Jesus. Jesus waited 2 days, and the return journey took another. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had lain in the grave 4 days, and the arithmetic suggests something sobering. Lazarus was likely dead or very near it before the message ever reached Jesus. The delay did not cause the death. What the delay did was allow death to become undeniable. When Jesus finally announced his intention to return to Judea, the disciples objected on grounds of plain survival. "Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again?" The memory was fresh. Only recently, in the temple at the Feast of Dedication, his enemies had taken up stones against him, and Bethany lay within walking distance of the men who wanted him dead. Jesus answered them first in figure, saying, "Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep." The disciples took him literally and reasoned that sleep would do a sick man good. So Jesus spoke without a veil, "Lazarus is dead." Then he added a sentence that reveals how completely he understood what was coming. "And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him." It was Thomas, called Didymus, who grasped the stakes most clearly. If Jesus walked back into Judea, his enemies would be waiting, and the men who followed him might share whatever fate found him there. Thomas said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." The words carry a grim loyalty, and they remind us that from this point forward, the road to Bethany was also a road toward the cross. When Jesus came near the village, Lazarus had already been in the grave 4 days, and that number mattered enormously to the people standing there. Jewish custom required burial on the day of death, so Lazarus had been wrapped, carried out, and sealed in the tomb within hours of his last breath. A popular belief of the period, later preserved in rabbinic writings, held that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days, hoping to return, and departed only when decay set in. Whatever one makes of that tradition, its practical meaning was clear to every mourner in Bethany. By the 4th day, death was final beyond any question of fainting spells or mistaken diagnosis. Hope had been given every chance to survive, and it had run out. Because Bethany stood so close to Jerusalem, many Jews from the city had come out to comfort the sisters, and the house was full of them. Mourning in that world was neither brief nor quiet. It involved days of weeping, visits of consolation, and often hired mourners whose laments filled the courtyard. Into that atmosphere came word that Jesus was approaching, and the sisters responded in ways entirely consistent with everything else Scripture tells us about them. Martha, the one who moved and served and spoke, went out to meet him on the road. Mary remained sitting in the house. Martha reached Jesus and said the sentence that had almost certainly been forming in her heart for days. "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." Faith and pain occupied those words in equal measure. She believed Jesus could have prevented this, and precisely because she believed it, his absence had wounded her. Yet she did not stop there. "But I know that even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee." Grief had not extinguished her reach toward him, even if she could not have said what she was reaching for. Jesus told her, "Thy brother shall rise again." And Martha answered from within the theology she had been taught, "I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day." This was the hope of the Pharisees and of most devout Jews, rooted in passages like Daniel's promise that many who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. The Sadducees denied any resurrection at all, but Martha held the orthodox hope of her people, a resurrection at the end of the age, distant and general. What Jesus said next pulled that distant hope into the present tense and located it in a person. "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die." He was telling Martha that resurrection was standing on the road in front of her. Life was in him, and death's claim dissolved wherever he chose to exercise his authority. Then he turned the entire conversation on a single question. "Believest thou this?" The question was personal, and Martha's answer has stood ever since as one of the great confessions of the New Testament. "Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world." Her brother was still in the tomb when she said it. Her tears were still real, her grief unresolved, and her faith spoke anyway. Martha then went back to the house and called her sister secretly, saying, "The Master is come, and calleth for thee." The secrecy was probably prudent, since the mourners from Jerusalem included people whose sympathies lay with the men who had recently tried to stone Jesus. Mary rose quickly and went out, and the mourners followed, assuming she was going to the grave to weep. When she reached Jesus, she fell at his feet and spoke the identical sentence her sister had spoken. "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." The same wound had produced the same words in both sisters, though Mary offered no theology after them, only tears. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews weeping with her, John tells us he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. The Greek verb behind groaned, embrimaomai, is a startling word that elsewhere describes the snort of an animal and carries a note of indignation. Jesus was not merely sad. Standing amid the wreckage that death had made of a family he loved, something in him rose up in anger against the enemy he had come to destroy. He asked, "Where have ye laid him?" And they answered, "Lord, come and see." Then comes the shortest verse in the English Bible and one of its deepest. Jesus wept. Even the vocabulary is telling, because John uses a different Greek word for Jesus' weeping than for the crowds. The mourners wailed aloud in the customary way, while the word applied to Jesus suggests quiet tears. He knew the tomb would be empty within the hour, and he wept anyway, because he had chosen to stand inside the sorrow before he revealed the glory. The onlookers read his tears correctly as far as they went, saying, "Behold how he loved him." Others asked a harder question. Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? It was an honest question, the same one grief has always asked when help arrives after the worst has already happened. Jesus came to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. The ordinary burial arrangement for a family of means in first-century Judea. He said, "Take ye away the stone." And Martha, practical to the last, objected with the plain physical reality of 4 days. "Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days." Jesus answered her, "Said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God?" And so the stone was rolled away, opening the boundary between the living and the dead in front of the entire crowd. Jesus then lifted his eyes and prayed aloud, thanking the Father for hearing him, and he explained why he prayed audibly. "Because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me." What was about to happen would demonstrate more than compassion. It would demonstrate that the Father had sent the Son, and that the Son carried authority over the one enemy no human power had ever defeated. When he had prayed, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." The voice that had called creation into being now called a dead man by name, and the command entered the tomb where no living ear remained to hear it, and Lazarus came out. John describes him bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin, shuffling from the darkness, still wrapped in the linens of his own burial. 4 days of death released its grip at a single command. Jesus said to the stunned onlookers, "Loose him and let him go." And the people who had come to mourn found themselves unwinding the evidence of a miracle with their own hands. Every strip of cloth they removed was testimony that the power of Christ had entered a sealed grave and emptied it. The scene inside that family defies full description. The brother Martha and Mary had washed, wrapped, and buried, was standing before them breathing, and the house that had held a week of mourning was about to hold something for which mourning has no vocabulary. Many of the Jews who had come to comfort Mary saw what Jesus did and believed on him, and by every human expectation the story should end there, in astonishment and worship. Instead, some of the witnesses went to the Pharisees and reported what had happened, and the chief priests and Pharisees convened a council. Their deliberation, as John records it, was driven less by theology than by political survival. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. A movement gathering around a man who could empty tombs threatened the fragile arrangement by which the temple aristocracy held its position under Rome. And the men who profited from that arrangement understood the threat perfectly. It was Caiaphas, the high priest that year, who cut through the council's hand-wringing. Caiaphas held his office at Roman pleasure, and held it longer than any high priest of the era, a survivor's tenure of nearly 2 decades, and he spoke like the political operator he was. "Ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not." He meant it as cold calculation, the sacrifice of one troublesome Galilean to preserve the nation's standing with Rome. John notes the bitter irony that Caiaphas, without understanding his own words, prophesied the substitutionary death Jesus would soon die, one man for the people. Then from that day forth they took counsel together to put him to death. Jesus, knowing it, withdrew from public movement to a town called Ephraim near the wilderness, and waited for the Passover that would be his last. This is why the raising of Lazarus belongs where John places it, at the hinge of his gospel, just before the road bends into Jerusalem. The sign that revealed Jesus as the resurrection and the life became the immediate legal pretext for his execution. He gave life to his friend, knowing his enemies would count that gift among the charges against him. John chapter 12 lets us see Lazarus once more. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus returned to Bethany, and they made him a supper. Martha served as she always had. Mary took a pound of costly spikenard and anointed the feet of Jesus, and the fragrance filled the house. And Lazarus, the man who had spent 4 days in a tomb, sat at the table eating with the one who had called him out of it. Crowds came to Bethany when word spread, and John is explicit that many came as much to see Lazarus as to see Jesus, because a man raised from the dead was a walking argument no sermon could match. The chief priests answered that argument with a decision that ranks among the darkest in the Gospels. John records that they consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Lazarus had done nothing but live after Jesus called his name, and his living had become intolerable to men whose authority could not survive alongside the evidence of God's. When God gives life, the darkness looks for a way to silence the witness. The account leaves us with truths worth carrying. The delay of Jesus was never the absence of his love. John binds the two together in the same breath, telling us Jesus loved this family, and then telling us he stayed away, so that no reader could conclude the waiting meant abandonment. His compassion preceded his power at every step, for he entered the sorrow of Bethany, stood weeping among the mourners, and only then approached the stone. The resurrection Martha hoped for at the last day turned out to be a person standing in front of her, because life was never merely something Christ would distribute at the end of history, but something he carried in himself. And a life restored by Jesus becomes its own testimony, for Lazarus preaches no sermon anywhere in the text, yet people believed simply because he was alive when everyone knew he had died. Lazarus reminds us that Jesus has never feared a sealed tomb. He walks toward the graves everyone else has abandoned, and when he speaks, even the dead answer. Whatever we have buried so deep that we no longer expect his voice to reach it. The road to Bethany says otherwise. He can stand before the stone we gave up on, call it by name, and turn a house of mourning into a testimony of glory. Next time, we will go deeper into the story when Jesus returns to Bethany, where a supper is prepared in his honor. As Lazarus sits among the guests, Mary approaches Jesus carrying a costly jar of spikenard. What she does will fill the house with its fragrance and point toward the burial that now draws near. If Jesus could call Lazarus out of the tomb after 4 days, he can bring life into places we thought were gone forever. Just ask Lazarus.